Calaroga Shark Media.
Hey there, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. Matt Rife tells Forbes his overnight success was a decade in the making. He was 15 when he landed on Wild 'N Out. Remember that on MTV? He was in 16 episodes. He said, I got Wild 'N Out, and that was a phenomenal launching platform for my career, but it's not what I want to do forever, which is why I left the show. He was trying to make his name in comedy. He said he was getting a few $100s a show and paying for his own flights while sensing that he was capable of much more. Rife says, nobody wants to pay any attention. How am I going to get in front of people if nobody wants to give me a chance? I'm not asking you for anything drastic, just an opportunity to get in front of people. My friend was like, why don't you just do it yourself? You're sitting here complaining about how nobody will give you an opportunity. Why don't you create your own opportunity, man? You have a little bit of a following, and comedians are starting to put their stuff out on YouTube. Why don't you just do that? That was the advice that led him to call his first YouTube special OnlyFans. That was a playful response to fans frequently asking if he had an OnlyFans page. People kept checking to see if I had an OnlyFans page, and I was getting tweets all the time asking about it. That's when the adult-themed platform exploded, and I thought if I named the special OnlyFans, it'd be a #1 Google. He funded the special through a GoFundMe. He raised close to 30 grand. And says, I think 15 or 20,000 was what I was really praying for, and for some reason, people were so supportive. People really believed in me and wanted this product. Only 40 people attended that taping. OnlyFans now boasts 13 million views on YouTube. His second special, Matthew Stephen Rife, has 21 million views. His third, Walking Red Flag, has 13 million. You may recall he sold out 260 dates in 48 hours. He said, I remember lying in bed as tickets went on sale. My phone blew up with a message from my agent. This sold out, this sold out. And I'm like, didn't it go on sale 5 minutes ago? Blew my mind. Heading forward, my passion's in film and television, acting and development. That's really where I want my career to go. There might be a day where I'm only doing movies and don't have the time to do stand-up anymore, at least tour the way I'm doing now. Touring has been my life for 13 years now, and it's all I've ever done, but it might not always be that way. Interesting. Boston Magazine asked Dane Cook about TV shows about comedians like Hacks or Mrs. Maisel. Dane said, I think Hacks is wonderful. I had the real privilege of sharing the stage a couple times with Hannah Einbinder. She was like, I'm such a huge fan. That made me feel great. I forget that I've been around for a minute. But we had this fun back and forth talking each other up. With Maisel, I'm so far behind, but I love it. I grew up loving films like The King of Comedy. Anything that kind of pulled back the curtain of funny people in the world of show business, I was infatuated with. In fact, I'm developing something now that's kind of similar, and I've never had so much fun failing miserably trying to get something off the ground. They asked Dane, what's your process? And Dane said, this is my favorite question because I wish you could get me and 10 other comics on a call and say, how do you write? Because it's so different. I found it in 97. If I wrote something down, when I looked at it again, I'd say, I'm unfunny. I stink. I realized that when I wrote something down, I hated it and thought it was terrible. But if I went on stage and just tried it on a dead Monday night somewhere, there was hope. If I organically talk about the first thought I have, instead of trying to write 10 things that I don't even know if they're funny or not, it's better. How does Dane deal with hecklers? He said, I had a heckler moment a few weeks ago, and she said something about my wife, something about my relationship, and I got really angry, but I learned something in therapy years ago. When someone makes you angry, respond with honesty. So I enjoy that process. Instead of just hammering them, I'm going to invite them to the table, so to speak. I treat the heckler like, I know you need to get something off your chest. I'll invite them, we'll go back and forth, and at the end of that, I'll hit them with some final zinger. But if you're talking about people who are just disruptive and rude, they're ruining the show for people around them. I get emails from people 10 years later saying, we still think about the night Jonathan got drunk at your show and you just scarlet lettered him. Dane Cook, who's the funniest person you know? Dane says it remains Dave Chappelle. He makes me laugh. I had the luxury of doing TD Garden with him back in October. He asked me to be a surprise guest, and I hadn't been on stage at the Garden since I did Vicious Circle. I do my 20 minutes, and I killed, honestly. Turned to my wife and said, no way Dave's going to be better, but he comes out, and my wife and I were wiping tears away. I was giving him a standing ovation mid-set. Who's the comedian that you weren't around for, but you'd most like to meet? He said, oh man, George Carlin. At times in my career when there was pushback against me and people were not happy to see us succeeding, he inspired me. I remember Carlin doing the hippy-dippy weatherman, and then the day he went on TV and killed it, he brought the cardboard cutout and threw it out of the frame and said, he's dead, I'm not this guy, and he literally kind of killed his career and allowed himself to say, I'm changing, and if you don't like it, I don't give a rat's ass. Worst moment on stage ever, Dane? He said, I was in a comedy group and we did the Garden in 1992 as part of WBCN's Rock of Boston show. Fish was the closing act. This is a good show. They put us on not at the beginning of the show, but 2+ hours into it, right after the Spin Doctors and before Fish. Being huge Fish fans, the entire crowd threw lighters and sandals. I got a welt on my neck. I got hit so hard with a lighter, I swear to you, if it hit me in the eye, I would have lost my sight. When I describe it, I say, you ever see the opening of Saving Private Ryan? Yeah, picture that, but with sandals and lighters. Dane will like this question for Sebastian Maniscalco, who was asked, how do you put the material together for a new tour? Sebastian said, I've probably been working on it for 2 years. It's not like I go in some room and start writing down funny things. It's more of living my life, extracting the humor in everyday occurrences, whether it be hanging out with my kids or my take on Amazon. He tells a story. I got 2 kids, 5 and 7. We don't bring the iPads to dinner. But that being said, if you don't bring out iPads, you basically become the iPad and are just doing whatever you can at the dinner table to entertain your kids. Like I'm doing things from the 80s to try and entertain my kids. That's a little morsel of something that I might be working on. And what you're seeing now is not what you're going to see at the end of the tour in April, because as I live life, material kind of comes. And I've noticed as a comedian, it seems that people really enjoy crowd work. I'm like, you know what? Let me lean into the crowd work a little bit. I think it personalizes the show a bit more. You got to know where to put it. I noticed just from trial and error, if you put it too early during the set, people all of a sudden think they're part of the show, and then they might yell stuff at you. So it's kind of a science where you drop it in. The Texas Chronicle asked Sheng Wang if he hadn't discovered comedy or if comedy hadn't discovered you, what'd you be doing today? Sheng Wang said, I don't really know. I don't think I would have been happy if I'd followed through with the business track. I was into poetry and photography, and maybe I'd be some kind of a photographer, perhaps. I'm not really sure. I still like to dabble in that. I'll still shoot pictures all the time, and sometime in the future, I might try to combine the two. One time, Sheng was asked best and worst comedy advice, and his answer to worst advice was that he should do more Asian jokes. I don't know if things have changed or things are changing, but I think something you come against when you perform for the general public. I feel like, especially if you're somewhat of an ethnic minority or just some kind of minority in general in our society, you feel pressure to do certain jokes, to address certain issues, to be a certain way. And I think that advice comes from that phenomenon. Like people, when they see an Asian person go on stage, they assume that these are the type of jokes they should be saying. And I think whoever gave me that advice had that mentality. I think it's terrible advice because it's not my nature to do those type of jokes. And I grew up hearing jokes, stereotypes, and stuff like that I find to be very limiting because it doesn't allow you to be who you really are, to be a whole person. I think it's much more freeing to do the jokes you really want to do, and I think it's bad advice to limit yourself in such a way. Nico Carney is one of Vulture's comedians you should and will know. Nico says, the first stand-ups I loved growing up were Tig Notaro, Mike Birbiglia, John Mulaney, Brian Regan, and Jim Gaffigan. All right, we see the lane there. I love comedians who use language and cadence that is very specific to them. I love Greer Barnes. He makes it look effortless. I'm also a big fan of Julio Torres. Worst show ever. I've done plenty of shows at restaurants where the audience was expecting a meal and surprise, there's a comedy show. Nothing could prepare you for doing anecdotal material about coming out as trans to a room full of people who just wanted to eat their burritos in peace. One time I did a bar show where the mic was so close to the end of the bar and the only audience members were all seated at the bar, so it was kind of like giving a toast to a group of strangers. If I had to pick one worst show ever, it was probably a college gig. They put me in a massive auditorium. I performed to silence for less than a dozen students, most of whom left. How many times have we heard how horrible these college shows are? The faculty member who organized it wanted me to stand in the elevator before the show to promote it. The only thing more humiliating than doing stand-up for a group of uninterested college students is barking for audience members in an elevator. Yikes. Interesting answer here. Biggest financial hurdle you've ever encountered since being a comedian? Travel and taxes. I had a show in Ohio, and even booking 3 months in advance, it was going to cost $900 to fly from New York to Cincinnati. No offense to the good people of Cincinnati, but who's going there for $900? The Cincinnati airport isn't even in Cincinnati. It's in Kentucky. The airlines need to get a grip. Taxes were also higher than I expected. I didn't realize the government needed so much money from an up-and-coming artist, but I guess we have to fund this failing nation somehow. Best comedy advice, worst comedy advice, best. Not to do crowd work for the first few years of comic. I think we're on the come down from the crowd work trend thanks to a very successful comedian whose special maybe didn't quite live up to the hype. Is that a slam at Matt Rife? But Matt Rife's special was pretty good. I don't know who he's slamming there. That's interesting. Hit me in the Facebook group if I'm forgetting somebody, but that's got to be a Rife dig, right? Yes, no. Facebook group is Daily Comedy News Podcast Group. I think a lot of young comics see it a quick way to go viral online, but starting out, it's so much more important to find your material and your voice than it is to learn how to do crowd work. Worst advice I've received was to talk less about being trans so I could make myself more palatable for larger audiences. From what I can tell, the man who told me this has never played a large audience. I'm not sure where he was coming from. I hope his open mics are going well. That's your comedy news for today. If you enjoy the program, tell a friend about it. They might like it too, and I'll see you tomorrow.